Indiana can be the best team in the country. You heard what I said. They're 9-0 so far. Coming into this week's matchup against Michigan, they took down the Washingtons of the world that took down Michigan. Why are we still questioning that Curtis Rourke, we talked about this a little bit. The dude had surgery on his thumb and comes in there and throws 4 touchdowns the following week. Remember what Coach Cignetti said, that he was going to be out indefinitely. He pulled the wool all right over our eyes, and this guy came out and was an absolute hero for Indiana. Some of the stats, just so you guys can kind of get, and we'll let Khalid go in, but some of the stats so far this year for Indiana are as follows. Curtis Rourke, 2,204 yards. He did miss last week's game. That we do have to throw that in there. He did miss last week's game, so these rankings are with that one game, not on the stat sheet for him. But 2,204 yards passing, that's 23rd in the country after missing one game. 19 touchdowns, that's 13th in the country after missing one game. 3 interceptions, 73.3 completion percentage, that's number 2 in the country. 88.5 quarterback rating, that's 2nd in the country so far. Some of the teams that they've beat: UCLA, who's starting to pick up steam, Maryland, Northwestern, these are all Big Ten opponents. Nebraska, who has a really good defense, went in there and smashed them. Washington, beat them. Michigan State, who's a good team, beat them. They're about to add Michigan to their resume this weekend. As far as the statistics, how did they match up? 3 points per. They're 3rd in points per game, 16th in yards per game, 13th in yards per play, 9th in third down conversion, and 25th in pass yards per game. Does that scream like a top 5 team to you, Khalid?
Again, I kind of said this a little earlier. I don't know how it doesn't. Look.
And it could have been better if Curtis was playing last week.
Yeah.
Those statistics.
My thing with the general argument of, they have a weak schedule, right? If you haven't lost a game, I don't care. I don't care, right? Because if the schedule, if it really was that easy, why aren't other teams also going undefeated with a very similar schedule, if not the same, right?
Yeah.
Like here's my thing with the Big 12 when they had the round robin for all those years, right? If it was so easy year in and year out, just the conference schedule, all the teams, if they're all so bad, why was Oklahoma the only team consistently going undefeated? And why did Texas have more losses than just Oklahoma, right? Like, seriously, if it was that easy, why aren't other teams doing it?
Mm-hmm. Great point.
If Indiana's schedule was so easy, how come other teams in the Big Ten, right, who haven't played, the other giants, why aren't they undefeated up to this point? So there's my first thing, right? It's like you're guilty until proven innocent. It's like people just don't want to believe that Indiana is a good team until they actually beat someone.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I get that maybe in the first few weeks of the season, but when you're going into week 11 and you're undefeated in a Power 4 conference, that's not a fluke. It's not. I don't know how you can rationalize putting an undefeated Power 4 team, ranking them below a 1 or 2 loss team who's also in a Power 4 conference. No, even if they have lost to other top-notch teams, right? I don't understand how Indiana isn't a top 5 team in the country, especially because the way that they're beating teams, right? It's one thing if you're, kind of scraping by, because I know that we've talked a lot about Miami on this show, right? And how they scrape by against Virginia Tech with that one call that shouldn't have been overturned. They needed a late comeback to beat Cal, right? they had that questionable reverse call against Louisville, right? In what was a close game up to that point.
Yep.
So we've talked about that and how, I don't like, is Miami legit? Like, what do we think about them, right? Because they've had some narrow wins. Indiana's, I guess, cushion in a game has never been questioned. They've won very comfortably. Mm-hmm. And even this past week, they got behind a little early. Defense, said, all right, we're turning up. And Curtis Rourke said, this thumb thing is no longer bothering me. Let's go out there and put some points on the board. And that's exactly what they did. I don't see how anyone can watch that and just be like, oh, their schedule sucks. I don't think they're good. Like, look at how they're doing it and the teams they're playing. Are any other teams doing what Indiana is doing to the same opponents? Ohio State didn't against Nebraska. I know they'll have the chance to duke it out head to head in a couple weeks here, but Indiana is playing like one of the best teams in the country. It may not be extremely sustainable, right? Because they have so many guys from the portal, recruiting, NIL stuff, right? But right now, this year, right? We're not judging them off of how they did last year, like the AP poll has a tendency to do. How are they doing this year? This year, they're playing like a top 5 team.
Yeah.
And if they beat Ohio State, depending on how it's done, you can make an argument that they could or should be ranked over Oregon.
And 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗶𝘀𝗀𝘀 doesn't get enough love for actually utilizing the transfer portal in the correct way, right? And a lot of the guys that he's brought over are guys that used to be at JMU. And when I look up and down this roster, the one thing that screams out to me and why I think that to be honest, bro, to be honest, one thing that I think about this team is that they could be the best in the country just by depth alone. Think about a guy like Taven Jackson, who was supposed to be Nico Iamaleava right now for Tennessee a couple years ago. It wasn't supposed to be Hendon Hooker. It wasn't supposed to be what's his name?
Joe Milton.
Joe Milton. It was supposed to be Taven Jackson in Tennessee. This guy comes over to Indiana after transferring out after 1 year with them and assumed a position as backup yet again to another guy in Curtis Rourke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just give you some names. We talked about Justice Ellison's a lot. And he has 669 yards, averaging six yards a carry, 9 touchdowns. Tyson Lawton was a running back at JMU last year and has the same amount of touchdowns as him and has 453 yards. That's depth. Oh, and it doesn't stop from there. There's another guy that used to be the backup to Amarion Hampton and Elijah Green that transferred over after being at North Carolina for 4 years. And guess what? He's got 5 touchdowns on the year. Their running back core all together this year has 32 touchdowns. Everybody that scored a touchdown on the ground this year, there's 32 of them. 32 touchdowns just on the ground alone. We love Elijah Surratt and what he's been doing too. Mm-hmm. Guess what? What school did he come from? James Madison. Elijah Surratt is one of the most underrated wide receivers in the country. Let's go over to a guy that's been there from last year and is stepping up as a sophomore, Amari Farrell. He's one of the best defensive backs in the country. Nobody talks about. Dude has 4 interceptions on this year. And then another guy coming from James Madison. I know we're saying the names a lot, but look where 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗀𝘀𝗀𝘂 has done. Michael Kamara has 9.5 sacks this year on defense. And if you've ever seen him and those linebackers play, every single one of those guys has dreadlocks. Remember we said this when they tried to gang and they all look the same.
And then you also have D'Angelo Pons, who came over from James Madison as well, the cornerback, and he's been lights out this season. 2 interceptions and 5 pass breakups. It's another one of those guys who's transferring in from James Madison, who's had standout games in a standout season. Been very impressive and fun to watch.
None of these games have been particularly close this year. The most
No.
that a team has scored on them was Maryland with 28 points. Northwestern scored 24. Everybody else, they're in the teens. But we're not going to go without saying that, yes, you could look at the score at Maryland, but they also scored 42 on them. You can look at the score against Northwestern 24, but they also scored 41 on them. So they're almost doubling their score. And to come off a game against Michigan State, a team that has looked really, really good so far, granted of their situation, it was 47-10. They just beat Washington the week before. Let me not stress this enough. Washington beat Michigan. We understand the caliber of coach that Jedd Fisch and Will Rogers and the guys out there.
Mm-hmm.
But we're looking at an even more complete team in Indiana. They're going to... I don't think this game is going to be particularly close either. And one of the last things that I did want to mention out of this whole thing is the way that they spread the ball around to everybody. I'm gonna give you some numbers. Surratt has 5 touchdowns. Cooper has 4. Price has 2. Cross has 3. Williams has 4. Horton has 3. That's his main receivers. And the only one that's standing out is because he's got more catches is Surratt. But you have a receiver on this team that has 22.6 yards a catch with 447 yards and Omar Cooper. And this is his second year. He's a sophomore. And the thing is when you look at this, they have depth for years. I don't know if 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 is gonna get up and just leave Indiana. I don't think that that's going to happen, right? I think that he's going to stay there and he's going to build this program to be a powerhouse in the Big Ten. Because I think the feather in his cap with that is bigger than him just going out to a Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, any of those schools and getting a bigger contract. He already knows what it's like to win out at James Madison. And he even left them a great structure. At the beginning of the year, they were putting 50 points up on teams like it was nothing.
And 70 on North Carolina.
I would have loved to see. Hindsight is always 20/20, right? But I would have loved to see what Jordan McLeod would have been like if Curtis Rourke didn't come, if he would have transferred out. But again, is this the genius of 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 and saying, I know what I had with Jordan McLeod and I understand he did numbers, but Curtis Rourke is just that much better? Nobody knows what that conversation was like. Maybe he didn't want him to come all the way, to Indiana with them. Maybe he told Jordan like, hey, we know what we got with you at JMU and thank you for your services, but you are a group of 5 quarterback. I'm sorry. Curtis was a group of 5 quarterback and we brought him in. Now he's a bona fide power 4 quarterback. That's to me right now. And I like Tyler Shugg. I think he's the man. But the more you remember that backside pass he threw to Surratt on the other side of the hashes.
Yep.
That backside throw, that was chef's kiss. That I haven't seen Shedeur throw this year, that I haven't seen Cam Ward throw this year, that I haven't seen Jackson Dart throw this year, that I haven't seen Jalen Milroe, Nico Iamaleava, none of these guys, I've not seen them throw that one pass. To me, and then when you're spreading the ball around to everybody and everybody's eating just with the same amount of volume as the next guy, I don't know. He's the best right now. And I think, and I'm not saying this to slight Dillon Gabriel because we love Dillon Gabriel, man. We do. But you can't ignore what the Indiana Hoosiers have got going on. I would love to see them in Oregon in the Big Ten championship. I really would. I would love to see Ohio State get shelved for how much money that they spent on players. And it would just be, if 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀, and what's up, Steve? See you in the chat. But if 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 goes in to Ohio State and they put the smackdown on them, because Nebraska was the blueprint. Let's not forget this. Dylan Raiola is just a younger quarterback. Curtis Rourke might have a field day. And he's going to get a little taste of what that's going to be like on defense with Jim Knowles, right? The thing is, is Will Johnson is there. If you can keep the ball away from Will Johnson, you can definitely keep the ball away from Davison Igbinosa. I love that dude out of Ohio State. He's my favorite DB this year. But they literally have the blueprint to go in and be successful against Ohio State. Because you're going against a defense that can match toe-to-toe with anybody in the country still. Mason Graham, Tykel Williams, you know what I'm saying? The Will Johnson, Davison Igbinosa. And then you got the two edge rushers that you got to deal with, the JT Tuimoloau, and then you got Jack Sawyer. They have those guys on Michigan too. I don't know, man. I think this is probably, I'm gonna make a hot take here. This is probably the worst thing that the Big Ten could have done is by having Indiana go play Michigan the week before they play Ohio State. They might be the giant killers, man. I just want to see them in Oregon play so bad now. But how much of a feather, I'm gonna ask you though, how much of a feather in the cap would it be if Kirk Cignetti, who hit the transfer portal just as much as Ohio State did, except they didn't pay as much money, and they go in there and they beat the team that pretty much was bought? Because that's going to be the storyline. And if ain't nobody saying it, we're going to talk about it.
I think that's gonna it's gonna change how people view the transfer portal or how they view players transferring from Group of Five schools, and it's gonna change. It should at least change people's perspective on it all, because it's like, this player played at a Power 4 school and they're going to another Power 4 school. They're gonna be great there, but like that doesn't mean much, right? Were you successful wherever you were at? Yes or no? Yes. If you go to the right spot, right, with the right scheme, I think it's safer to say that they will be successful there than some guy who played at a Power 4 school and is going to another Power 4 school, right? Because you look at what Indiana's done, right? You mentioned all of those players, right? There's familiarity there and success at their previous destination, right? Success at James Madison.
Yes.
And you give them to a coach who gets the most out of his players, and not just the most out of his players, the most out of those players, right? It's going to change, I think, how people see the transfer portal, and hopefully at least it draws more attention to the stars from the Group of Five schools who make a jump, right? You can even take a look at corners, or not corners, an offensive tackle from Oregon, right? Johnny Cornelius, one of the better tackles in the country, transferred from Rhode Island, right?
Yeah.
Look at Jared Verse, transferred from Albany to Florida State. Incredible player, first-round pick. Looks like he could win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award in the NFL. You're smaller, and Albany and Rhode Island are both FCS, not even Group of Five. So my point being, like, I really do hope that this Indiana year really just changes people's views of the Group of Five schools, because there are absolutely talented players at that level who get overlooked simply because of where they play, right? But
Quinion Mitchell, Toledo.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you can ball,
Curtis Rourke,
you can ball. Yeah, Curtis Rourke, right? And I think people just need to get out. Like, sure, a Power 4 school 9 times out of 10 will beat almost any given Group of Five school generally, right? When you look at the best from each group, but that doesn't mean that the players on that Group of Five team, that there aren't players who could start at Power 4 at almost any Power 4 school they wanted to, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't like the assumptions that are made there about certain players, because you look at some of these guys like a Curtis Rourke, right? Like a D'Angelo Pons, right? Like an Elijah Surratt. These are guys who were very successful at their previous Group of Five schools. They're now at Indiana with familiarity and a good coaching staff and a scheme that is tailored towards them. And look at what happens. Success immediately.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to make Indiana a very hot destination moving forward. And I hope it is. I hope that that Cincinnati is able to build this into a long-term thing. Because let's just assume worst case scenario, they do manage to lose to Ohio State. Well, suddenly, right, you're looking at a regular season where you have what, one loss, maybe two if you somehow lose to Michigan as well.
Maybe.
In year one. What fan base isn't happy with 11-1 or 10-2 in year one of a head coach other than Alabama, right? Like, especially since Indiana is historically more of a basketball school. Like, I love it for the Indiana fan base.
That's true.
And all things considered, what's happening here should say a lot about how we as fans, we as scouts, and then the coaches out there should view group of 5 players entering the portal.
I'm going to tell you, outside of, I don't know how much people pay attention to these schools, right? And FIU has been like a very interesting school to watch this year. And there's a young man by the name of Eric Rivers who might be the best receiver in the country right now. Let's just go through the stats of some of the top receivers. We know Trey Harris, 59 receptions, 987 yards, 16 yards a reception. Nick Nash, he's a group of 5 guy. He's number 2 in the country, 995 yards, 12 touchdowns. So he's up there. He's a leader. But Tedero McMillan is sitting there number 1. Do we even need to talk about Tedero McMillan? If you don't know who Tedero McMillan is, I don't know what to tell you. But the guy that is up there leading the country and as far as top receivers and average per catch, 20.4 yards a catch, 876 yards on 43 receptions and 8 touchdowns. You don't think Kirk Cignetti right now is like licking his chops? How can we get Eric Rivers out of Florida International University and bring him to a Power 4 school and possibly his last year of eligibility? Because I believe he's a junior this year. His last year eligibility. If he doesn't redshirt, but literally he's only been playing for 2 years and he's putting up these type of numbers and giving FIU a chance. FIU has been traditionally, ever since I was a little boy, they sucked.
Yeah.
They're 3-6 right now, but they beat Central Michigan, who's been historically a pretty good team. Louisiana Tech, who's had the dog in their fight. And New Mexico State that just came off and beat the brakes against them 34-13. And Eric Rivers had 295 yards and 3 touchdowns against them. So, Kirk Cignetti is good at finding those guys that are definitely proven. So, and, not meant to call out Eric Rivers like that, but I think, kind of what I saw in like Gage Larvadain last year from Miami of Ohio. He's down there in South Carolina right now. These are the guys. He's a great example. Miami of Ohio, he's now down there in South Carolina, even though he's not a primary receiver, things like that. But like, he played bigger than a group of 5, and they saw that when he entered the transfer portal. He's better than that. Silas Bolden, I understand he played at Oregon State, but like, he's at Texas now. That's an upgrade.
Yeah.
These dudes are good. Yeah. Torque says, if Indiana and Oregon play in the Big Ten title game, do they get in no matter what?
Yes, absolutely.
I think both of them get in, and it's Penn State versus Ohio State for an at-large bid. I think it's Ohio State. You know what? It looks bad if you put a Penn State in there just because the damning record of James Franklin against top 5 schools. You gotta you gotta have some governance in place, right? Regardless of what the record is. How bad is it gonna look? This is not a Florida State situation at this point in time where the team goes 13-0 and doesn't get in. Which, again, I understood the rules, so I was not mad when Jordan Travis got hurt. I understood the rules, but this is different. James Franklin is like what, 1-11 against top 5 schools or something ridiculous like that.
Pretty bad.
You can't allow that to happen, especially if you have Ohio State there. And if they take a loss against Indiana and Indiana ends up winning against Oregon in the Big Ten championship, there's no way that Penn State gets in and you allow Ohio State to get in there. Look, first of all, they're a proven program. And Penn State is too, but James Franklin, that record, if me and Khalid were sitting there, that's the first thing we'll bring up. Well, this is the first year of the playoff. Do you really want a guy that really can't beat any? He hasn't proven that he can beat any of these other 11 schools historically. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, and then you also throw in the fact that you assume that if Indiana plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, that means they beat Ohio State in 2 weeks. Yep. If you beat Ohio State in 2 weeks, you do something that James Franklin and Penn State haven't done since what was it, like 2018 or 2016 or something like that? It was 2016, like 8 straight years. So in year one, Curt Cignetti and Indiana take down Ohio State. If they do that, they're going to be head and shoulders above Penn State in people's minds, in the playoff committee's minds. And I mean, think of it this way, right? This pertains, I think this especially will hold true for the Big Ten and the SEC because of their perception as the two best conferences in college football, right? Which I think varies from year to year, but I digress. If you are undefeated going into your conference championship game in a 12-team playoff format, you are guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. Win or lose. You could lose by 50. I think they will still put you in because that is your only loss. If one loss in the regular season will really get you in, if you're undefeated in the regular season and your only loss is in the conference championship game, you're going to be in, right? Just mathematically, there won't be enough good teams or teams with as good of records as that to fill all the other spots in the playoffs. Like there just won't. So I think that Indiana, especially because they're in the Big Ten, if they do go into Lucas Oil Stadium and they lose to Oregon, right? But that's their only loss of the season. They're 12-1 when all is said and done. Yeah, they're a lock for the playoffs, and I think that they're probably going to host a playoff game, which is crazy to say. Like, what in the world? They will be a 5 to 8 seed, absolutely. So that's kind of where I stand on that, and I would be shocked if that scenario set itself up and then they weren't in the playoffs or they were 9 through 12 in the playoff rankings. I feel pretty confident about that too, just based off of, I guess, precedent.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you there. I mean, there has been more weird things that have happened in college football at this point in time. And could that be a possibility where Penn State gets in over Ohio State if that scenario works out? I would be the first year of a 12-team playoff, I'd be very surprised. And to be honest, if that was revealed on the last week that they're doing this, that Penn State gets in over Ohio State and Indiana wins the conference championship against Oregon, I think me and Khalid might stop doing the podcast for about 3 weeks and said that this is bullcrap because there's got to be some politics that get played that everybody's in favor of, right? Mm-hmm. And that would have to be one of them. There's no way that you should allow, especially in a close game like Ohio State had against Oregon.
Yeah.
Penn State's been getting the brakes beat off of them. So how do you allow this? So I don't know, man. That's just kind of how I see everything playing out. I'm still very interested to see how much of this game is gonna come down to the wire. If it's Indiana and Oregon, will it be another Ohio State Oregon matchup, or will it strictly be Oregon trumps over Indiana and then we have no question that Ohio State is the team, or does Indiana go in and beat the brakes off of Oregon? I don't know, man. This is why it's so interesting this year, because this seems more like the NFL this year in college than the NFL is being college. Like,
Yeah.
the NFL is so unpredictable every single year.
And now
Outside of the
beat
Chiefs.
anybody. Like I've seen more parity in college football this year than in a long time.
And you know what's hilarious? Is this just had to be the first year for the 12-team playoff that this
They're gonna
happened.
have a headache.
The college football committee was like, damn it, why is everybody losing this year? Why? Because this is making it so difficult. The Heisman too.
Mm-hmm.
Let Miami go in there and get
goodness.
the brakes beat off of them by a team. No matter what we said about Clemson last week, I still think Clemson could come in on a good day and beat the brakes off of a lot of teams. I think if we said this, and we'll pound the table for this too. Virginia Tech goes in there and plays Miami again, the way that they're rolling right now, and if Kyron Jones was healthy, they might win that game by 2 scores now. Especially if they play in Blacksburg.
Mm-hmm.
Let it be a night game in Blacksburg. Virginia Tech's winning that game. I think Louisville, if they had a chance to play Miami again. Tyler Shugg was without what's his name? Callis. What's the kid's name? Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. The wide receiver that opted out.
Colin Lacey.
Colin Lacey. I don't know why I put it together. Callis. Colin Lacey opted out for the rest of the year. And they still won. They're still winning games. Tyler Shugg putting that team on his back right now. And their freshman running back is insane.
Yeah, Isaac Brown, he's probably the best freshman running back in the country. He also just rushed for multiple touchdowns and over 150 yards. So,
yeah, man, it's nasty work in these streets. But what I can tell you is that there's, like Khalid said, there's a lot of parity that's happening, man. But we could talk about Indiana all day. This is a really good team, regardless of what everybody feels about their schedule, because you know what? Everybody's getting beat this year. So strength of schedule, you could throw that argument out the window. Really, really and truly, it's about how much you're beat. Who are you beating? How much are you beating them by at this point in time? Is the only thing that you could save face on. Because any given week, one team can come out of the woodworks. Look, we were all talking about Oregon was dog shit at the beginning of the year. Well, I wasn't. But a lot of people were looking at the scores against Boise State and everybody else that they were playing and saying, oh my gosh. And then you figure out that Idaho's actually a really good school. Boise State's been fairly good. And then you throw in there the combination of like this school, maybe they underestimated a little bit of those teams. And you're going in there 80%. And these teams are coming at you 150% because they got nothing to lose. They really don't. Their thing is to come in and beat you and have the next Marshall versus Michigan matchup, right? Everybody, or not Marshall, Appalachian State. That's what we want to see again. Oh my God, I can't, bro. I remember when I was younger seeing that. I was like, this is crazy. It's nasty work. Michigan has not had a good, and Michigan has not had a good history. Let's be honest. The most winningest regular season team of all time, but they got probably the worst upset on their record of all time too. and they're having a TCU type of collapse this year after a national championship win. And I love to see it, by the way.